The Atlanta Falcons had a lot of turnover in the offseason in terms of their front office, but more especially their coaching staff, and it was needed. It was time for a change. Dimitrov was kind of sort of reassigned. Mike Smith was sent packing, and it was something that ultimately needed to happen. You have two types of teams in the NFL. I talk about it so often, those with the franchise quarterback and those without. And if you're in a situation where you actually have a franchise quarterback like the Atlanta Falcons do with Matt Ryan, yet you can't even put together an 8-8 season, you got some major serious issues going on, and clearly something has gone amiss. And you're talking about a guy like Matt Ryan with guys like Julio Jones and Roddy White to throw to, and you're talking about a team that struggles to win 5 or 6 games. And coming off of the heels of a bad 4-12 finish, I believe it was, in 2013, the Falcons were pretty much just as bad in 2014. And that embarrassing performance of Week 17 against Carolina at home with the division title on the line and a playoff berth at stake, that sealed the deal. It was time for a change. So the Atlanta Falcons decided they were going to break off their own piece of the Seahawk way and bring in defensive coordinator Dan Quinn to be that new guy. And ultimately, time will tell if that's the right decision or not. But clearly, he was their guy from the beginning of the process. They waited so long to bring him in. They sat there, and even as the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl, they didn't hire anybody. You could clearly tell that this is the guy they wanted. Sometimes that's a good thing. That means that the team has a clear-cut vision, and they know where they want to go. And sometimes it just could be that they fall so in love with the bullshit that they can't see past anything else, and maybe they allow other opportunities to pass them by. But, for me, for the Falcons, this was going to be an important NFL draft this year because this was a team that needed help in a lot of places. And somewhat similar to the Chicago Bears, it was going to be a team where a lot of people focused on the needs on the defensive end of the ball, on the defensive side, and acted as if those were the only problems. Now, granted, the Falcons' defense has been bad. It's pretty much been mediocre to bad the entire 7 years under former head coach Mike Smith. And there is no doubt in my mind that the defense needed to be addressed early and often, multiple times, in the 2015 NFL Draft. But the Atlanta Falcons, again, similar to my Chicago Bears, couldn't be focused so much on that. They allowed superior prospects on the offensive side of the ball to fall through their fingertips. Because they have needs on the offensive side of the ball, too. And for me, one of their biggest needs as a team, period, regardless of the side of the ball, was a 3-down running back, or at least a guy that could be a better between the tackles runner. Because if you could upgrade that defense some, and the fact that you have big-time playmakers on the outside in Jones and White, and a franchise quarterback in Matt Ryan, you get a running game that can provide some balance to that offense, some physical identity to that offense, and most importantly, keep that defense off the field. This is a Falcons team that could make some major strides and some big improvements as soon as 2015. But I was expecting early, more likely than not, the Atlanta Falcons to focus on the defensive side of the ball. And based off of the way the board broke down, it worked out with what they did. They needed an impact edge rusher, and for their scheme and what they want to do, they may very well have gotten one out of Vic Beasley, the outside linebacker from Clemson. Now, is he a guy that's better suited for a 3-4? Or is he a guy that's better suited for that Leo type of position to play even a Bruce Irvin type of role at strong side backer in the 4-3? I guess only time will tell, but I almost get the feeling, based off of his athleticism, that Beasley was better suited for the type of scheme that Dan Quinn is surely going to want to run in Atlanta. So based off of how the board broke down and everything else, I thought it was a good matching of player and need right there at number 8 overall for the Atlanta Falcons. Now, maybe they would have wanted to trade up for somebody like a Dante Fowler, and obviously he suffered a torn ACL, which sucks for all parties involved. But they got an impact edge rusher, a guy that should be able to come in and give them some type of boost, some type of lift with some explosive edge rush ability. Then in round 2, you've already got a stud corner in Desmond Trufant. Now you bring in an athletic, physical guy from LSU like Jalen Collins. Now, there's questions about why he was able to only start 10 games during his college career. Here's a guy that sometimes looks like more of a tease and looks more of the part than he actually is the part. But again, you're talking about a guy coming from a situation in Seattle where he understands the value of having a great secondary, having athletic safeties, and having guys on the outside that are big and physical. And a Jalen Collins most certainly fits into that mold of a Seattle Seahawks type of corner, big, physical, and fast. So again, taking him in round 2, talk about a guy with that size and with that speed and quickness, it's definitely worth the gamble. But the most important thing to me of all was that the Falcons were able to get a 3-down running back, or at least a physical between the tackles type runner in this draft. And they got that, in my opinion, in the 3rd round in Tevin Coleman out of Indiana. Now, when I look at Tevin Coleman, is he a pure 3-down back in the NFL? I don't know. There's some questions about stamina, which makes me wonder, are we talking about he has an asthma problem or some other type of respiratory ailment that will cause him some issues in certain places, maybe like a Denver? I don't really know. But here's a guy that I see that could be a DeMarco Murray type of back and has a lot of home run threat ability, and a guy that can cause some damage out of the backfield as a receiver as well. And now you take the fact that you bring him into an offense with Matt Ryan as the quarterback and Jones and White on the outside. You know, there could be some good opportunities right away for a guy like a Tevin Coleman. But I also like what the Falcons did in day 3. They got some really good values there. Getting Justin Hardy in the 4th round. Some of you might say receiver was the last of their needs. Well, when you get Justin Hardy sitting in your lap in round number 4, you don't pass up on that guy. This guy, to me, is an NFL player, and he's going to be a legit one for a long time. And you could use a young slot receiver now that Harry Douglas is gone, and Devin Hester even's at the tail end of his career. And then to get a guy in the 5th round like Grady Jarrett from Clemson, a guy that I thought was criminally underdrafted, represents a pure steal for the Falcons in round 5. A guy that could do all types of things, lined up at different places, in my opinion, on Dan Quinn's defensive line in Atlanta. I thought this was a really good draft for the Atlanta Falcons on many different levels, and one of the best draft classes that any team had in the entire 2015 NFL draft. Now, their best pick to me, honestly, was Tevin Coleman, because this was a Falcons team that needed to improve their running game, and I think they did just that in Tevin Coleman. You know, should they have maybe taken Todd Gurley number 8? Who knows? Only time will tell. But I really like the pick of Tevin Coleman. I thought he was a guy that could have went mid to late portion of round 2. They got him in the early portion of round 3, so he was good value. He addressed a huge position of need, arguably to me the most important position of need that the Falcons had on their roster, period. And for so many of you Falcon fans, they didn't have to spend a 1st or 2nd round pick on it. So everybody could be fucking happy about it. Picks that could surprise. I look at Justin Hardy and I look at Grady Jarrett. These are 2 guys that I expect to be valuable, at least if nothing else, role players and contributors on the Falcons for some period of time. And to be able to get those guys in round 4 and round 5 is really, really good value. This was, to me, easily the best draft class the Atlanta Falcons have had in some time. And I do have a couple of concerns or a couple things I kind of second guess about it. Number 1, they didn't address the tight end position. And you know, while this wasn't a great tight end class, maybe in round 2, they could have been in a position, instead of taking Jalen Collins, to draft a guy like a Max Williams. You know, maybe that was a direction they should have went, because that offense lost a lot when it lost Tony Gonzalez. And I don't agree with the philosophy of, well, we can negate and ignore the tight end position. No, you can't. In today's NFL, you need those guys, and they don't have those guys on their roster. And they waited very late to address their offensive line. And I thought that was something that maybe could have been addressed a little bit earlier, perhaps even with a day 2 pick, or at least most certainly a day 3 pick in round 4 or 5. However, I will give them a pass on not addressing the offensive line earlier, because I look at guys like Tevin Coleman, Justin Hardy, Grady Jarrett. I'm like, you couldn't have a much better round 3, 4, and 5. And as a result, it's really hard to sit there and knock them for that. You're kind of nitpicking at that point. It was a really good draft overall. I think the Falcons ultimately got impact players all 3 days. I think Vic Beasley is going to be an impact player for them. I think Tevin Coleman's going to be an impact player for them. Collins as a number 2 corner opposite Desmond Trufant could potentially be kind of scary in that NFC South. And I look at guys like Justin Hardy and Grady Jarrett. They might never be stars, but I most certainly don't think they'll be training camp cuts, and I most certainly don't think they'll be NFL washouts. They'll be long-term contributors and guys that could step up in roles and make big plays at big times. They managed to fill most of their needs without reaching. Like, I look at the Falcons draft for the first 5 rounds, and there's not a real reach to be found for me anywhere. I think Beasley was about right based off of the way this draft played out. I think Jalen Collins, in my mind, from an athletic physical standpoint, is a bit of a value pick. I thought Tevin Coleman was a value pick. And I most certainly thought Grady Jarrett and Justin Hardy were good value picks and perhaps even steals. And when you could sit there and not have to get cute and trade up or trade down, when you can sit there and address needs without reaching, when you can address needs while at the same time getting really good value or even best player available on the board, you've done a really good job. And at the end of the day, based off of what the Atlanta Falcons did in the 2015 draft, I think they deserve an A grade for it. I thought they had one of the best drafts out of anybody. I think this is the type of class that is going to really help this Falcons organization reap some major benefits. I don't know if they'll all come in 2015, but in 2016, 2017, you could see this class really being the impetus for a major change in Atlanta and a big reason for a turnaround and an improvement in performance.